Every analyst is watching China. Every strategist is watching the United States. And every headline is covering the same tired rivalry between two giants who've been fighting for the same throne for decades. But while the world's attention is locked on that battle, somewhere else, something extraordinary is happening. A country is quietly rewriting its own future, building alliances, acquiring resources, training engineers, funding technology, and positioning itself in a way that most Western experts are only beginning to understand. By the time the world fully wakes up to what's happening, it may already be too late. Today, we're pulling back the curtain. We're going beyond the headlines, beyond the noise, and into the real data, the real strategy, and the real story of the country that is quietly becoming the world's next superpower. And no, it is not China.
Welcome to Trend Secrets, where we go beyond the surface to uncover the forces reshaping our world before most people even notice them. If this is your first time here, this channel is built on one idea. The most important things happening in the world are rarely the things being loudly talked about. So let's talk about what isn't being talked about loudly enough.
Before we reveal the country, and we will, let's first understand something important. Superpowers don't announce themselves. They don't hold press conferences saying, "Hello world, we are now the dominant global force. Please update your textbooks." No, history shows us something far more interesting. When the United States rose to dominance after World War II, it wasn't through one dramatic moment. It was through decades of quiet economic expansion, institutional building, and strategic positioning that most of the world didn't fully appreciate until it was already done. When China began its transformation in the 1980s, the Western world largely laughed. Economists called it a developing nation experiment. Strategists called it temporary. And 30 years later, China holds over $3 trillion in foreign exchange reserves and manufactures nearly 30% of everything the world produces. The pattern is always the same. Rise quietly, build deeply, then emerge. And right now, in 2025, that pattern is playing out again.
Say, what does a rising superpower actually look like? What are the specific signals we should be watching? Economists and geopolitical analysts generally agree on 5 key markers. Number 1, rapid and sustained economic growth. Number 2, expanding military capability and strategic alliances. Number 3, technological investment and innovation output. Number 4, control over critical global resources or trade routes. And number 5, soft power, cultural influence, education exports, and diplomatic reach. Now, keep those 5 in your mind, because the country we're about to discuss is checking every single one of those boxes and doing it faster than almost anyone predicted.
The country is India. Now, before you say, "I knew it," or "that's obvious," stay with me. Because the India most people think they know, and the India that actually exists in 2025, are 2 very different countries. Most people still picture India through an outdated lens. A country of 1 billion people, yes, but also poverty, infrastructure problems, bureaucracy, and slow growth. And that version of India, it existed. Parts of it still do. But there is another India, a parallel story that has been quietly building for over a decade. And the numbers behind that story are, frankly, staggering. India is now the world's most populous country, surpassing China in 2023 with over 1.4 billion people. It is the world's 5th largest economy by nominal GDP, and the 3rd largest by purchasing power parity. In 2023 and 2024, India was the fastest growing major economy on the planet, expanding at over 7% annually, while the United States grew at roughly 2.5%, and Europe struggled near zero. But raw GDP numbers are just the beginning. The real story is what's happening underneath those numbers. And that's where it gets fascinating.
Let's talk about the economy, because this is where the story gets genuinely extraordinary. For most of its post-independence history, India ran what economists called a license raj, a bureaucratic system so thick with red tape that starting a business could take years of government approvals. Foreign investment was limited. Innovation was strangled by regulation. That system began breaking down in 1991 with major economic reforms. But the real acceleration happened in the last 10 years. India has risen from 134th place to 63rd in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business rankings in under a decade. Foreign direct investment into India hit nearly $72 billion in 2023, a record high. The country has produced over 100 unicorn startups. That's private companies valued at over $1 billion, making it the third largest startup ecosystem in the world, behind only the United States and China.
But here's what most people miss. India's economic engine isn't just about software companies in Bangalore or call centers. That era is the foundation, not the ceiling. What's being built now is an entirely new industrial base. India's government launched a program called Production-Linked Incentives, or PLI schemes, offering billions of dollars in direct subsidies to manufacturers who build in India. Semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, electronics, defense equipment, solar panels. Apple now manufactures iPhones in India. Samsung builds phones there. And dozens of global companies that spent decades dependent on China are quietly shifting supply chains, or at minimum, building Indian backups. Pointed. After COVID revealed how dangerous it was to rely on a single country for manufacturing, that single country being China, India became the world's most strategically attractive alternative. And they knew it, and they planned for it.
Now let's talk about something that doesn't show up on a quarterly earnings report, but might be the single most powerful force behind India's rise. Demographics. Slow, deliberate. India has the youngest large population on Earth. The median age in India is 28 years old. Compare that to China, where the median age is 39, and a population that is rapidly aging due to decades of the one-child policy. Compare it to Japan, median age 49, Germany, 46, even the United States, 38. Pause. Let those numbers hit. What that means in practical terms is this. While the rest of the world's major economies are facing aging workforces, rising pension costs, shrinking tax bases, and a demographic crisis that will take decades to resolve, India has hundreds of millions of young, working-age people entering their most productive years. Every single year, approximately 1 million young Indians enter the workforce. Every single year. That is an economic force multiplier that cannot be manufactured, cannot be imported, and cannot be replicated quickly. And here's where it connects to technology. India produces over 1.5 million engineering graduates annually, more than any other country on Earth. The founders or co-founders of Google, Microsoft, Adobe, IBM, and dozens of Fortune 500 companies are of Indian origin. This isn't coincidence. It is the product of a culture that has, for generations, placed enormous value on technical education, even when the broader economy couldn't always absorb that talent. For decades, India's best minds left. They went to Silicon Valley. They built American companies. They drove American innovation. But something has changed. In 2025, for the first time in modern history, significant numbers of those minds are coming back, or never leaving at all. Because the opportunity in India is finally beginning to match the opportunity abroad.
Now let's move to the chessboard, because economically, India's story is remarkable, but geopolitically, it is nothing short of masterful. Pause. India practices what its foreign policy establishment calls strategic autonomy. In plain English, it refuses to be owned by anyone. Slight emphasis on the following. India is a founding member of the BRICS group, alongside Brazil, Russia, China, and South Africa, a coalition explicitly designed to reduce dependence on Western-dominated financial systems. At the same time, India is a core member of the Quad Alliance, alongside the United States, Australia, and Japan, a grouping explicitly designed to counter Chinese influence in the Indo-Pacific. Pause. Let the tension register. Think about that for a moment. India is simultaneously sitting at the table with China's allies and sitting at the table with China's rivals. It is playing both sides, not out of dishonesty, but out of a deliberate, long-calculated strategy to preserve maximum leverage in a world that is rapidly splitting into two camps.
When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022 and the Western world demanded countries choose sides, India didn't choose. It continued buying discounted Russian oil, saving billions, while maintaining its relationships with Washington, London, and Brussels. The Western world was frustrated, but they couldn't afford to push India away, and India knew that. That is not weakness. That is extraordinarily sophisticated statecraft. And then there's the global South play. India has positioned itself as the natural leader of the developing world. Countries across Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East that feel ignored or exploited by both Western institutions and Chinese debt diplomacy. When India hosted the G20 summit in 2023, Prime Minister Modi made a point of centering the voices of the global South. It wasn't an accident. It was a signal to every developing nation on Earth. We see you, we represent you, we are one of you.
Let's talk technology, because this is where India's trajectory becomes truly difficult to bet against. India's Unified Payments Interface, known as UPI, is the world's largest real-time digital payment system. In 2023 alone, it processed over 100 billion transactions. 100 billion transactions in a single year. The United States, with all of its financial technology infrastructure, doesn't come close to those numbers in digital transaction volume. India built a digital public infrastructure called the India Stack that links every citizen's identity, bank account, and mobile phone into a single interoperable system. This system has brought over 500 million previously unbanked people into the formal economy in under a decade. The World Bank called it one of the most significant financial inclusion achievements in human history.
Now add to that India's rapidly expanding investments in artificial intelligence, space technology, and defense manufacturing. India's space agency, ISRO, successfully landed a spacecraft near the lunar South Pole in 2023, a region no country had ever successfully reached. The cost of that mission? $75 million. For context, that is less than the production budget of the movie Interstellar. That's like dry humor pause, then back to serious. That ratio of cost to achievement tells you something profound about India's ability to do more with less, to engineer solutions that the rest of the world hasn't figured out how to make affordable. That skill, frugal innovation, as economists call it, is going to matter enormously in a world that needs solutions for 8 billion people, not just the wealthy billion. Now, here is where intellectual honesty matters. India's rise is real. The data is real. The trajectory is real. But this is not a guaranteed story. There are genuine, serious obstacles that could slow or derail this rise, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something.
So, why does any of this matter to you, sitting wherever you are in the world right now? Because a shift in global power
doesn't stay in government buildings and diplomatic cables. It ripples outward into supply chains, into job markets, into where money flows, into which currencies matter, into which cities become the new centers of innovation. If you work in technology, the competition and the collaboration coming out of India will reshape your industry. Already is reshaping it. If you work in manufacturing or business, the supply chain shifts happening right now will change where things are made and at what cost. If you invest, the Indian market has been one of the best performing major markets in the world over the last 5 years. Understanding what's driving that matters. And if you simply want to understand the world you're living in,
Knowing that the global order is shifting, not in 50 years, not in 20 years, but right now, puts you ahead of the majority of people who are still operating on a map that is rapidly becoming outdated. The United States will remain a superpower. China will remain a superpower. But the world is not going to be a two-player game for much longer. A third force is rising. It is ancient in its civilization and modern in its ambition. It is democratic in its governance and ruthless in its strategy. It is humble in its global posture and enormous in its potential. The world is no longer stable, and it shouldn't be. We are entering the age of superpower, diverse power, and power of one. The story we covered today is just the surface. India's relationship with China, its military buildup along the Himalayas, the battle for influence across Africa, and the coming semiconductor race, these are all chapters of a much larger story that we'll be covering in future videos. If this gave you a new lens to look at the world through, that's exactly what this channel is built for. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next piece of this story. Drop a comment below. Tell me, did this change how you see India? Or did you see this coming all along? And share this with one person who you think needs to understand where the world is actually heading. This is Trend Secrets. Stay curious, stay ahead. And we'll see you next Sunday.